I'm Jake, Farmer Jake, and I have been the farm manager here since 2003, which is quite a long time, which is really great because, let me see this, got that, I don't want to leave this meeting, which is great because it's really good. I work with a really good group of people who drive the tractors and look after the livestock. We've got a lot of sheep, we've got some cows, we've got a few horses as well, although they're a slightly different business, but they're all part of the farm. And I didn't come from farming. My mum and dad were teachers. So I really wanted to be a farmer from when I was about 12 years old. So anybody in year 7, I guess it would probably be. I really wanted to be working outdoors, looking after animals, especially cows at the time. And also to start driving farm machinery, tractors, diggers, JCBs, things like that. So I had to go to university. I had to study really hard. And then I started off working on farms as an assistant farm manager. And then eventually I got promoted up and I moved around the countryside to become a farm manager in the end. So this is where I am. And as I say, it's a really fun farm. It's very high. So I'm going to turn the camera around now because I'm sure you'll want to see a bit more of the farm rather than a bit more of me. I hope I'm going to have enough signal to be able to keep the farm tour going. If I lose signal, I will sort of backtrack. But we're going to go for a little bit of a walk around. So these are some of our sheep. And I don't know whether you know, but about 65% of the UK farmland is only suitable for growing grass. And because we're humans, we have only got one stomach, we've only got one tummy, whereas animals like ruminants, and that's cows and sheep, have got 4 tummies, which is really clever. And they've evolved over millions and millions of years to be able to eat grass, which we can't do, and turn it into meat products, as well as wool in the case of sheep, leather in the case of cows. So they're really clever animals to be able to turn something that we can't use into something that we can. So sheep are really important. Now I've got to keep half, and now the bull is the daddy cow, and the cows are the female cows, the mums, and that's the same with the sheep. So these are all mummy sheep, and at the moment they're grazing this grassland, and you can see there's lots of droppings here, which is really important to help build the fertility, to build nutrients and feed the grass so that it can grow for the horses and for the sheep for next year. So by grazing our animals across the grass means we don't have to put artificial fertilizer on there. An artificial fertilizer comes with quite a high carbon footprint. And carbon footprint is something I'm going to talk a lot about today, and also how we can reduce our carbon by farming in a really responsible and really clever way. And it's something called integrated farm management, which sounds really complicated, but all it is about looking at the whole picture. So looking at our crops, looking at our animals, looking at our hedgerows and our trees, to see how we can optimize the performance out of all of them. So these are called Hereford cows. They're a really old breed, and we don't have very many here on the stud. There's a bull, he's at the back there, so I'm not going to go and see him because he might be a bit grumpy. But then he's got a couple of ladies. So these are the cows, and his job is to get them in calf, which means for them to have some babies, which we will then keep on the farm here for about 2 years, 2.5 years, and then they'll go to the abattoir where we will kill them, and then that beef comes back to the farm here and to the local village. So from a sustainability point of view, the animals are born on the farm here, they're raised back to us, and they only graze grass. So from a carbon footprint point of view, and an emissions point of view, that's really, really important for the environment, because grass is growing nearly all year round, and grass and plants and trees and hedgerows are really, really clever. They do something called photosynthesis, and it uses the sunshine, the energy in the sun, the carbon in the air, and they turn all that into something that we can use, and it's called a carbon cycle. So these, I'm just going to make sure they're not following me across the field. No, we're all right. It's called a carbon cycle. So this carbon is constantly cycling around in our environment. Now, there's not very much grass here at all, so these girls will be moved into the next field tomorrow. But they're doing a really helpful job in terms of nibbling all this grass down so that it's got the winter to sort of recover and recuperate before mares, which are the female horses, and their foals come out into here in the springtime. But just before we leave the sheep, the lambs will be lambing, or the ewes will be lambing in April, and they'll be fed on grass and also something called stubble turnips, which are like a root plant, which we grow specifically for our sheep to be able to eat. And that's a really important crop because it feeds the lambs with really good nutrition to get them up to the right weight so that we can sell them. And then ultimately they also end up as lamb chops and roast lamb and things like that. Our fields are all divided up with these lovely hedges, and you can see on here all these super berries, which are really important for, look at all these ones here, for our farmland birds. We do a lot of work with a ringing group, and they come out onto the farm and they catch the farmland birds, and they weigh them and they measure them, measure their wings and record how old they are, how heavy they weigh, and they put a little tiny ring on their leg. It doesn't hurt them. Then they release them, and then those birds are trapped again in other parts of the countryside. And it's really important to try and learn how animals and birds especially sort of migrate around our countryside. So we haven't cut this hedge for a few years, and you can see how many berries we have on here. And hedges are really important as a type of habitat. And with the changing climate, some of the trees that are in our hedges and in our farmed environment, so in the wider sort of woodland and things like that, like this ash tree here, are struggling with different diseases. This has got something called ash dieback, which you might have heard of before. And as a result of some of our changing climate and warming weather, our trees are being exposed to different diseases. So we have to be planting more and more trees, more and more hedgerows. Last year we planted 1 kilometre of hedgerows on the farm here, 1,000 metres, to try and capture more carbon, to provide more habitat and more linked up habitat as well. So we have got little corridors all over the farm that our birds and our insects and our mammals can all use as little corridors to move around. So this is a really great bit of hedge here. Look how many berries there are on here. And this will be helping to provide food for lots of our farmland birds all over the winter. So we'll try and leave this until January, February time before we come and trim it. Now, we do need to trim them occasionally. We try to do it every 3 or 4 years to keep them under some degree of sort of control and sort of management. Otherwise, they just get really, really tall and gangly. They have a risk then of falling over and dying. But then we will also go and, if that does happen in places, we'll go and we'll gap up and we'll plant new bits of hedgerow in those little gaps. So our hedgerow management, great habitat, interlinked with trees in the landscape. Really, really important part of what we do. Probably our biggest area of land is in crop production. We grow lots and lots of different crops, which is really important because that is something called a rotation, and we rotate different crops in the same field. Now I'm going to do something a bit naughty here and try and climb over this gate, but it's a bit dodgy because right. So that's our grassland, and then come through this hedge, and then we come onto some of our cropland. Now what we do here, so we've got our hedge. We leave nice wide grassy margins here. We just mow a little strip around the side of the crop once a year, just before harvest, and that protects the hedge from any of the fertilizer or the pesticides that we apply to our fields. And they're quite an important part of what we do and how we manage the farm, and it's really really key to getting good, safe food production without using too much, but using enough to be able to do the job. And that's where the skills of the farm manager or the agronomist, who is like a crop doctor, who help me look after our crops to keep them clean and healthy, is all part of what we do. So our rotation is really, really crucial. I've got some plants and crops that I can show you in a second, but I just wanted to walk through this field of wheat. So very, very small plants at the moment. We planted these about 3 weeks ago into a field of beans. So 2 years ago, this field had wheat on it. Then it had beans last year, and now it's got wheat again this year. Next year, it will have spring barley, and then it might go into a crop of linseed or winter barley, then oilseed rape, and then wheat again. So we try not to grow the same crop in the same field 2 years on the trot. And the way we've changed our farming system has been really important from an economic point of view, so a financial point of view, which is why we started this journey, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. And that journey has brought us to really focus on the importance of our soil, and how we manage and how we look after our soil has so many really positive environmental benefits. And I want to just give you a few little examples here, a little bit of farmer Jake experiments in the field. So it might not work, but let's see what we can do. So soil is really, really important. It grows our crops. We want to have healthy crops so that we use less pesticides and use less fertilizer, but it's also a really nutritious grain that we can harvest later in the year. So this is what we call winter wheat. So it's planted in the winter. So as I say, about 3 weeks ago, and it's only just starting to emerge through the ground. So it's got one leaf, maybe 2 leaves on it now. So it's got quite a lot of growing to do. And by the time you finish your school year at the moment, so if you're in year 5 at the moment, when you start year 6, this time next year, we will have harvested this crop, but when you're on your summer holidays. So these crops stay in the ground for probably about 11 months. So it takes a really long time from planting our seeds to harvesting the grains. And then we have to store the grains. We've got a big grain store just over there where we store it all, that we can look after it. But our soil is really, really important. And what we've been doing with our soil management is something called regenerative agriculture or conservation agriculture. And we've moved away from ploughing and cultivating. We do this thing called no-till, which means that we use a special drill, which is over there. We'll come and talk about that in a minute. To plant our crops into the old leftover bits, if you like, of the old crops. So all these bits that you can see here, like this, these are all the old bits of beans. So there's a bean pod, if you like, that was harvested. There's a bit of stalk. And can you see how they're all in clumps together? This is really important. There's a clump there. Can you see that? That's called an earthworm midden. And that's like a larder, like a refrigerator for the earthworm. And at night, they're really deep burrowing earthworms. They can go down 2 meters, and they'll pop up at night when it's all dark and wet, especially at this time of year. And they'll scrape all of this bean haulm, we call it, the residue, into a larder. And if I pick this up very, very carefully, we should be able to see, there you go, look. There's one worm. Now that's a surface dwelling worm, so that's not the really big ones that we're after. But if you look down that hole there, can you see that? That is the earthworm's burrow. So that's his house or her house. So we do lots of sampling. So I'm going to put that back there. So it can have its breakfast when it wakes up later on. So our soil is really important. Earthworms are really important because they help with removal of what we call compaction. And compaction is where the soil gets squashed by driving over it all the time with different machinery. So we've got this thing here called a soil compaction tester. And what we do, I'm going to try and do it with one hand, which means I might fall over. But if I don't, we need to see this dial here. And if the soil is in really good condition, this dial won't go past the green on the outside. Okay, so this is a really good test for Farmer Jake to see if his soil management has been good. So we have to push down on it, pushing down, pushing down, pushing down. Going down, going down, going down, going down, going down. Right, so I've pushed that, can see there. So if I'm really, really happy with that because that's about 50 centimetres that this bar has gone into the ground without any compaction at all. So any resistance to my roots, so the roots and the plants can access lots of nutrition, lots of goodness. Then another test we do is with a soil auger. So we put it in the ground like that, we give it a twist, and then we send that off for analysis to see what sort of fertilizers we need to apply. And that's really important because the more we can analyze what is in our soil, it means we don't have to put so much artificial fertilizer on, which costs us money. Some of it is dug out of the ground in big open cast mines or underground mines. So it's using natural resources. So by farming in this way, we're having healthier soil by not moving it around. We're keeping something growing on our fields all the time. These are stubble turnips up here, which the sheep will eat later on. And then we put a little bit of, this is vetch here as well, which is leguminous, which means it fixes nitrogen. It makes nitrogen from the air and can feed it to the plant. And that's really, really important. So by not moving our soil around, you can see there's lots of straw from the old crop here. We've got lots of leaves, lots of plants growing on it. And I did some studies in America a few years ago. And they have this brilliant expression called soil armor. And if you have a look across this field, you can't really see very much soil. There's a little bit here. But it's protected, it's covered. So it means it's being protected from the air, from heavy rain, from sunshine, all those things that cause soil erosion. The bean field is a little bit trickier because it's beans. They break down very, very quickly. So it's very hard to keep soil cover on there. But once we've harvested the wheat and chopped that straw, we'll be able to, one of the other tests we like to do is a soil infiltration test. So this is a test of how the soil reacts to rain. So here I've got a tube and I've got some water. And what we do is we pour the water into the tube. I should set a timer off now. And then we time how long it takes for that water to infiltrate into our soil. And if that's infiltrating really quickly, then our soil is in good condition and good health. So we might just come back to that one if we've got time, because I'm quite conscious that we're moving along very, very rapidly. So our cultivation system is no more, and we have this very big drill, which is a planting machine, and pulled by quite a big tractor. Now, the reason I picked this field is because this is about 10 acres. So it's 4 hectares, which is the same size as about 6 football pitches. So next time you're at a football match or you're watching a football match on the television, you could fit about 6 football pitches into this field. And from a climate point of view, when we were doing cultivations, so that was ploughing and cultivating and planting, that field would have used up or needed 200 litres of diesel from the tractors to get that crop to the stage that it is now, so just emerging. So that's cultivations before planting. Since moving to this system, that field has only used up 80 litres. So you can see that by changing our system, we're buying a lot less diesel, which is a fossil fuel, which has a carbon footprint, which is quite significant. So by making some changes, some quite big changes, we're actually able to reduce the carbon that we are using to grow our crops. And we've done this to the stage now where across all of the farm, we're actually carbon negative. So we're actually sequestering, we're capturing more carbon than we're emitting. And that's from everything, from our sheep, from the fuel we buy, from the fertilizer we buy, from the machinery we buy, because all of our machinery and our iPhones all have a carbon footprint. So we need to be careful about how we use all of these resources, because they're not going to be there forever. So by changing that system, we're able to use less fuel, we use less fertilizer, which puts us in a really, really good place. But not only all of those things, we're actually growing food for people. And this is really, really important, because the climate in the UK, although it's changing and it's difficult sometimes, is really, really good for growing crops. We have pretty regular rain, although the last few years it's been really, really difficult, because we have had, now where's that? I've lost it now. Oh no, there it is. We've had really, really heavy rains at the time of planting crops, so we haven't been able to get the whole farm planted. And the challenge of weather is really, really important to us, and we look at it every day. So that's it is going down. It's going down quite slowly, but we have had a lot of rain recently, so I'll try and come back to that again later on. The weather is really important, and it impacts everything we do, from when we can plant, the quality of things that we harvest, the cost of harvesting wet grains and things like that. But we've got facilities to be able to deal with that. But the challenge we have going forward is more and more unpredictability. And that's why we need more farmers to be involved in regenerative agriculture, conservation agriculture, to try and be more carbon negative and actually suck not just our own carbon that we're emitting out of the atmosphere, but also other people's as well. Now, crops that we grow. So we also grow some peas. So these are planted in the spring. So these would have been planted in April or March last year and harvested back in the summer. So they're not in the ground for very long. And those of you that like mushy peas, that's where these end up. So if you ever go to a fish and chip shop and you like mushy peas with your chips, they might well have come from our farm. This is another crop that we like to grow. It's been very, very difficult to grow recently for all sorts of reasons, but this is a brassica. So it's related to broccoli and cabbages and cauliflowers and things like that. But this is oilseed rape, and it's got quite a nice root on there, lots of soil attached to the root, which is really important. And this was planted in August this year, but last year we harvested lots of oilseed rape seeds, and this is little tiny black seeds. And you might know oilseed rape from having a bright yellow flower in the summertime, sort of April, May time. Some people are a little bit allergic to it, but it's a really, really important crop for our country and also for everybody that likes cooking. So this is some cold pressed rapeseed oil, which is used in biodiesel. So we have a proportion of this in our petrol, in our diesel cars. Not in our petrol, in our diesel cars. It's ethanol that's in the petrol, but also for cooking. Really, 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 really great. Really, really great for cooking, and very, very healthy for you as well. So we grow oilseed rape, peas, and then barley. So this is the barley that we grow. We grow some that we plant in the winter, called winter malting barley, and some in the spring as well. And we have a contract with Molson Coors, and our malting barley goes into making Carling lager. And Carling uses 100% British barley, which is great to be able to be associated with a company that supports British farmers so well. And once the malting process has happened, which is a really, really interesting process, and the extract that gets left over, the malt, goes in to make Marmite or Maltesers or malt biscuits. Anything with malt in has originated in malting barley. Now, I would normally ask who loves and hates Marmite, but we haven't got time for that today. But so again, see some Marmite, Maltesers, anything like that. Really, really lovely crop to grow. And then wheat. This is our biggest area and our biggest volume. We probably grow about 4,000 tons of wheat every year. So quite a lot. And there's a nice maths question there. If each loaf of bread has 400 grams of wheat in it, how many loaves can we make out of our 4,000 tons? So wheat is milled. We try to sell to local mills to cut down on our food miles. That's really important. We can't do it so much for oilseed rape because there's only 2 plants in the country that can process, sorry, 3 now, that can process oilseed rape. We've got one that's about 50 miles away, then there's one in Liverpool and one in London. So wheat is important. We grow wheat as part of a group with Kellogg's. For Kellogg's into Special K and what's the other one? Fruit and Fibre. Wheat also goes into Weetabix, obviously bread, biscuits, wraps, all sorts of things like that. Wheat is a really, really versatile grain. And the other crop we grow is this one here. This was only planted on the 10th of October. So it's about 3 weeks old. And these are beans. So it doesn't take very long for the beans to grow out of the ground. And then we'll harvest these in August, September next year. And these, if they're good enough, will go into human consumption. So it will go into products that people are able to eat. So again, really, really important in terms of producing food and capturing carbon, filtering water and things like that on the farm. And then these are turnips, which are used to feed the sheep. So after we've harvested some wheat, we'll plant some fields with turnips. And then when the grass runs out, we will move the sheep onto these fields and they eat the tops off, the leaves very, very quickly. And then they start eating the bulb, the bit on the ground. And there's 2 different sorts there. And we like to grow different varieties of things because it keeps them, it keeps the diversity and the genetics quite different in the field, which is important. And farmers use a lot of technology. We use satellite guidance for the tractor, usually up on the roof there between the 2 orange beacons. There's a little satellite receiver. We take it off at this time of year because some naughty people like to steal them. So we have to be careful. So that one has been taken away. We use drones to inspect and look at our crops because although it looks really, really good from this angle, when you look from the air and above, looking down onto our fields, we can see drains that are blocked or having a problem, and areas of pests that have eaten some of our crops away. So lots and lots of technology. We use lots of satellite imagery to help us plan our fertilizer applications, so we are not wasting fertilizer and putting too much on, because nitrogen fertilizer is really good for growing bigger yields, but it comes with, from a carbon point of view, water courses. So we have to be really responsible, really careful. So we try to use as little as we possibly can, but we have to use enough to be able to grow a good enough yield to be able to keep in business. So we're doing lots of things to help our fields become more resilient. And this is one of the things we're doing. So this is a cover crop, a bit like the stubble turnips. So this was after wheat and it's going into spring barley next year. We've got more soil armour covering it, but then we've also got lots of roots that are helping to break the soil up, to aerate it, to feed the soil bacteria and the fungi, which will ultimately mean that we can use less fertiliser on the next crop than we probably would have done 5 or 6 years ago before we started in this more regenerative system. So we're putting the soil at the heart of what we do. The soil has huge amount of nutrients in there. And in the past, where we have been cultivating the field, we've had to make those nutrients up by applying them artificially. By improving our soil, we're not needing to do that. We're getting better water infiltrating. So when it rains heavily now, the water is going through the fields and not running off and causing erosion. We're capturing carbon from the atmosphere. We're providing food for people. Around the edges of the field, we're capturing carbon in hedgerows, and in trees, and woodlands. So for me, as a farmer, this is a really, really positive story, and one that I've been really, really delighted to be able to share with you all today. And I'm sorry that the signal sort of dropped out halfway through, but I hope you've been able to pick up the majority of what I've been showing you here at Overbury. So thank you for your time. I think we might have some questions, Tabitha.
We have loads of questions for you, Jake. I don't think we're going to get through them all right now, as there are so many. We'll try and get back to those we can't answer. We'll try and get back to all of your questions in an email, maybe to all of you, once the live farm tour has finished. So we had a few sent in beforehand. So here's a question from Brookham School in Hampshire. Are you reducing the number of animals you have and planting more veg to help save the planet?
That's a really interesting question. No, we're not actually. What we're trying to do is to keep the same numbers of animals that we have, but farm them in a more sustainable way. So what we're trying to do is to use the grass that the sheep are grazing on to capture more carbon. So the more grass we can grow, the more roots we grow, and the more carbon those roots are pushing into the soil and capturing carbon, locking it away and storing it. So what we're trying to do is maintain the numbers, bring a bit of diversity in as well. So we're actually looking at getting some more cows so that we can actually have a mixed grazing system. But it's very low input and it's all grass fed. And that's really, really important because they have higher omega-3 levels in the meat. It's more tasty. It's got a lower carbon footprint. We want to sell it locally so that we can support and be a hub for our local communities to be able to provide more local produce. Vegetables is a really interesting one, and the UK doesn't grow enough vegetables, and in our diets we don't eat enough vegetables. So we do actually, we don't farm them ourselves, but we do have some vegetables grown here on the farm. We grow a few salad onions, we grow some beetroot, and we grow some hand-picked peas, so like a mange tout pea, a garden pea. So we do grow some vegetables on the farm. We can't grow them all in this regenerative system because they go to the supermarkets, which demand all the peas are the same size, all the beetroots are the same size, and all the salad onions are the same size, which means we have to do a little bit of cultivation for the onions and the beetroot. So there are some knock-on effects, if you like, to our farming system, which just need to be balanced out. And I think that's really important. It's this whole balance of what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to grow food, we're trying to enhance the environment, we're trying to have more farmland birds, and trying to produce really high quality nutritional food for people.
Thank you, Jake. Next one. This is from Antrim Primary School in Northern Ireland. Which plants do you think are the best ones to grow to help the environment?
That's a great question. Which plants are the best ones to grow? I think, again, coming back to my point about diversity, if you find the very best one, you couldn't plant it in the same field year after year after year after year. Partly because if everybody did that, we would all be eating the same thing. And if that was beans, it would be a disaster. Think of all the methane we'd be exploding around in the environment. So what we need to do, we need to have a balance. So we need to grow some wheat, we need to grow some peas and some beans, and they're really good plants to grow because they capture nitrogen, they feed the soil biology, and then the following crop, the wheat or the barley, which doesn't do that, can use those nutrients. So we then need to apply less to those following crops. So I think a balanced environment and a balanced diet is really important. I love a balanced diet. I like to eat some red meat. I like to eat some white meat, some fish, loads of vegetables. And it's that balance which is really important. Our bodies are designed to eat all sorts of different things and to do lots of exercise. I'm lucky I get to walk around the farm quite a lot. But it's that balance that's so important. But great question.
Thank you. One that's been put in the chat from teacher Mrs. Meredith. Do all farmers work like this, or is Farmer Jake exceptional in your work practice?
So farming is really changing. Farming in terms of regenerative agriculture, conservation agriculture is really popular at the moment. Partly because we know that some of our farming practices in the past have not been great for the environment. But if you cast your mind back to why those practices were being adopted, it was as a result of coming out of the Second World War, when we had no food in the country and we had a rising population. It wasn't that long ago we had a population here of 4 billion people. We've now got 7.5 billion people, all wanting to eat a very varied diet. So the pressure has been put onto farmers to produce that food and to produce it relatively cheaply. There is a huge movement now in terms of regenerative agriculture. Every time I open the Farmers Weekly, which is a farming magazine, there are pictures of equipment like this, thoughts on cover cropping and different crops to grow. So there is a real change in the industry at the moment. This is partly driven as well by the government strategy to get to net zero by 2050, but then also the National Farmers Union has said, no, UK agriculture can do that by 2040. We're carbon negative already. So the blueprint is here. We just need to encourage more farmers through education, through support and advice, to be able to change their farming system to farm a bit more sympathetically to the environment. But at the end of the day, we still need to earn money so that I can be paid to manage it. We can still buy new machinery so that we've got equipment that is suitable for what we're trying to do. The farm staff need to be paid. We need to have money to plant trees. So there is definitely a balance, but we're probably a bit more profitable now than we used to be by farming in this way.
Perfect, thanks Jake. I think we've probably got time for one more quick question, and then, as I said, everyone else's questions we'll try and answer what we can a bit later on today in an email. So this final question is from Harvey. He's in Eagle class at Highhurst Wood Primary School in East Sussex. He asks, do you have electric tractors?
Harvey, that's a really great question. Electricity is something that we need to be looking at as an industry. The trouble is that where we have got to at the moment, the batteries don't really last long enough. So this tractor here, when it's working in the summer, goes off from the farm at 8 o'clock in the morning and it doesn't come back till 10 o'clock at night. That would need a lot of batteries to be able to keep it going. So I don't think batteries are there for everything. They're certainly there for some smaller vehicles and farm trucks and things like that. But where I think the solution could come from is with hydrogen power. And Ford are producing hydrogen powered tractors at the moment, not quite as big as this in terms of how many horsepower this is. This is a big tractor. But for some of the smaller ones, hydrogen could well be something that we need to look at in the future. And I'd be all up for trying something like that, most definitely.
Thank you so much, Jake. And I'm sure everyone watching will be passing on a big thanks to Farmer Jake as well for giving us a tour of his farm today. Hopefully everyone's learned something and taken something away. So just a big thank you, and hopefully we'll be joining lots of you again next Thursday at the same time for a different farmer, Farmer Duncan, taking us on a live farm tour of his farm in Northamptonshire. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the great questions as well.